So now we get to the interesting part of the discussion, and if you've got a question, please raise your hand. I think there are roaming microphones, and also feel free to SMS or tweet in your questions. I'll open the discussion, I think, just building upon what you were talking about, Josephine, and there is this idea that reconciliation is someone else's problem, it's someone else's initiative, it's a corporate initiative that the sustainability partner does this really great reconciliation action plan, it looks really good. I think traditionally we've looked at, well, government is the answer, and there's lots of money that gets spent on these initiatives. In recent time, we've seen, I think, this emergence of the private sector, and this topic being discussed at this conference is a great example of what is the role of the private sector, do you think, in reconciliation?
Well, in terms of the recent growth of joint ventures, now that there's a government, the Commonwealth procurement policy, and I must say that this is something that's not new internationally. I mean, the US have been doing this since President Nixon started the Minority Business Diversity Agency, and in the US they've got a much more rigorous program of minority procurement spend. But I have to say, treat Aboriginal people as with respect. I'm seeing a lot of joint ventures now which are really concerning me with Aboriginal people, and you see on that film they're as keen as mustard and enthusiastic, bright-eyed, because they see the private sector as a new way of employment and freedom. But some of the joint ventures that are happening now are what we call blackcladding, where an Indigenous person will form a joint venture with a company, and I think you've got a huge responsibility when doing that to make sure that the Aboriginal business owner that you're actually going into business with understands what the joint venture is, and actually that it is a proper meaningful joint venture, and you're not just using the Aboriginal person as to get around that policy. The more meaningful and sustainable is two-way learning, and those of you who are interested in sustainability and things like impact investing, you'll find if you do the right thing at the start, it normally has the benefits at the end.
And Catherine, you mentioned the work that KPMG have been doing through Joe, and can you just tell us a little bit about some of the learnings, and both in terms of the skills that KPMG staff have contributed to some of those projects, but also some of the skills that they've brought back to the business?
Sure, Michael. Look, it's absolutely a reciprocal relationship. And I do just want to sort of make a comment on Josephine, and I have been working together very closely. I don't think reconciliation is fluffy, because I think it's under the guise of reconciliation that we've obviously been supporting a significant project you've been working on, and it's what's really helped us, I guess, if you like, create a framework for what we're doing as an organisation. And I think that reconciliation is something that I think is really, certainly from a personal perspective, vital to our growth as a nation. I think that the unity and the trust that we need to build upon and develop, and the inequality that we need to address for the first Australians of this nation is absolutely vital to our identity and success as a nation. So I think that reconciliation as a process is, sure, it can be fluffy for some, but it's certainly not fluffy for many. But it's we've been involved in the Jarwin program, as I said, for 10 years, and so we don't, sell products. We sell our people and their services. So we have exceptionally talented people in our organisation who are working on a whole range of projects. So, for example, we've recently had somebody working in the East Kimberley developing a financial plan for an emerging business and community there. We've had people working on board and governance projects with organisations. We've been working for the last several years with some long-term secondees on a whole community development plan for Shepparton in the Goulburn-Murray region, which is all around economic development. And I think one of the exciting things I've seen in the last 10 years with the corporate sector is what I call this seismic shift in terms of corporate Australia stepping up and engaging. And I think that for too long it's been seen as government's responsibility. The private sector has a vital and critical role to play, and what's making the difference now is that we're moving from seeing government welfare, and we've got to be careful we don't replace that with corporate welfare, but what we've got to do is work on building the commercial capability of Indigenous businesses and communities so that they can succeed on their own terms and start to have a greater voice in the economy, because I think with that will come a lot of change, and also we know that that will have a positive impact on some of the social determinants as well in community.
Awesome. And we'll open it up to any questions. Okay, so we've got an SMS. This is first time for me, so this is quite good with technology. And these are unfiltered too, they told me, so a bit of a warning there. The first question is, what do you think about the lack of efficiency around supporting multiple remote communities? Are there better ways to spend the same funds in supporting Indigenous communities in the long run?
Yeah, well, those of you who are project managers in the room will know that it's a complicated skill and not potentially one which the government is good at. I think the housing in remote communities has failed Indigenous people. The materials are wrong. And I think absolutely there's huge amounts of efficiency that can be rolled out around remote communities. And it's interesting because I'm doing a longer speech at ANU tomorrow, but when you look at, you know, in Australia we support farmers, we have diesel subsidies, we have, you know, tax breaks, but I don't see that. People will always tell people in remote communities, go and move into the city where there's jobs. The investment has to be made, and deep thinking around how do we plan out these communities? Where are the opportunities for growth? Where's the opportunities for aquaculture, agriculture, or some of the emerging, you know, opportunities for Aboriginal people if they want to remain on their land and to have thriving communities, particularly in the north.
And Jason, I think, is there anything to build upon from what you're seeing at Supply Nation around those Indigenous businesses, and where are they starting up, and where are they being successful, and in many ways, what are some of the challenges that they face?
Josephine mentioned before the Indigenous procurement policy by the federal government, which has directed all federal agencies to look at 3% of all contracts by the end of this financial year to be with Indigenous businesses, which is a huge, Catherine spoke about seismic shifts. Policy is, as you know, a great driver for change. With that change, it brings along a few growth pains for Indigenous businesses, particularly around building capacity and capability to, say, get involved with a $2 or $3 million project. So you have the push and pull from the federal government saying we need to get Indigenous businesses on this contract. The Indigenous businesses going, well, I'd love to do this, but I need more plant and equipment to do that particular job, and then potentially go into joint ventures. But I think the call to action as well with that, and Josephine made a good point around utilising skills and experiences from particularly the private sector. We're actually building a platform at the moment where we're connecting skilled volunteers to speak with Indigenous business owners that you saw in this video around how do I do a cash flow forecast, or how do I digitally market my product or service, or how do I actually put together a really well-written pitch for this piece of work. So the biggest challenge at the moment is not that there isn't products or services or a unique business offering, it's around the capacity and the capability of these Indigenous businesses.
Yep.
And some fascinating, we spend most of our time at Supply Nation breaking down myths about Indigenous business, and not just painting dots and boomerangs and didgeridoos. We have aeronautical engineering firms. There's 2 cryogenic providers in Brisbane, which is amazing. So you have this quite a raft of different businesses, and most of our job is saying, well, no, you're not special. We can actually put you in touch with some really sophisticated business models as well.
Yep, awesome.